What up, Hoss? Welcome to a Thursday Collection Connection, where we're playing a game that's just an excuse to talk about records. I play the game with my brother, Plastic Eric, from the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel. And every week, we show an album, him on Monday, me on Thursday, and the only real rule is that the album that we talk about has to in some way relate to the album previously shown in the other's video. Pretty simple, but in the end, just an excuse to talk about albums. So in Eric's last video, the album that he talked about was Here Today, Tomorrow, Next Week by the Sugar Cubes, which was an album that I had on cassette way back when it came out. I had bought their first album, Life's Too Good. While I like the album overall, and it's got a bunch of stuff on it that I still like to this day that I think is really good. Like Cat is great, and Effing in Rhythm and Sorrow is a good one. Cold Sweat, Delicious Demon, all good stuff that holds up and I enjoy listening to this day. Really, it was Birthday. Birthday is the song. It's a singular song that I'd never heard anything like before, and even in the Sugar Cubes' own work, I've never heard really anything like since. Even in the very experimental work of Björk herself, nothing quite had that nebulous liquid quality of Birthday, with its tumbling drum patterns and sort of backward sounding trumpet noises and that particular brand of dreaminess. It's fantastic. I'm not aware of any other song that is quite like Birthday. That said, I did not cotton to the follow-up really that much. So when I fully committed to shifting formats from cassette to CD, I had already given all my LPs up to Eric, my brother, who I do the show with, this series. I gave him all my albums that I had, which was like 50 albums at that point, and decided that I was all in on CDs, and over time, everything that I had on cassette that I really liked, I bought on CD. But I never bought Here Today, Tomorrow, Next Week because it never made that super impression on me. So it was funny to go back and listen to it, having not heard it in like 30 plus years at this point, which makes me sick. How long ago that is. It was like a new listening experience. It wasn't that I was blown away by it this time. It had some ups. I think that I'm not crazy about the opening track. Feels a little try-hard. It feels like the Sugar Cubes trying to sound like the Sugar Cubes to me. And that is a tough hurdle to get over. But some of the songs deep therein, I liked The Bee when I listened to it. And it wasn't as bad as my memory sort of planted it. The roots that grew without having listened to it in years and years and years. But still, I probably made the right call by not buying it on CD for my own personal tastes. And it's also funny to me that I didn't remember or recognize that the title Hot Meat on the record was sort of a country version, reimagining, re-recording of Cold Sweat from the first record. That was an odd one when it came on. I was like, huh, okay, yeah, Hot Meat. That's what they say it in Cold Sweat. But that was a surprise. I did like Hit off of the third album. So I bought that one, which was probably the first one that I actually bought on CD initially. And so I still have that CD. It benefited. I don't know if that was one that I had had on cassette that I would have bothered to buy on CD if CD was not the format in which I first purchased it. So as it stands, the Sugar Cubes have 3 albums in their discography, and I own the first and third of them. And I once upon a time had the second one, but elected not to repurchase it on CD. And immediately what that made me want to do, just because I think it's an interesting connection, is an album that I used to have in a different format, either on LP or on cassette, that didn't quite rate it for me to make the leap onto CD. But just about the only rule that we have, short of the actual connection, is the collection part of the game. And so that would indicate that the album was not in my collection. So that was not going to happen. But navigating a path toward a wonkier connection that I still think kind of works, just because I think it's an interesting thing to talk about. My eye fell on the Dream Academy here back on the wall, and the fact that they have 3 albums, and I had bought the first and third of those albums. Now, in the case of the Sugar Cubes, I had Here Today, Tomorrow, Next Week on cassette, but made the decision not to repurchase it on CD. However, in the case of the Dream Academy, I had no idea that the second album even existed. So when my future wife and I moved in together and integrated our music collections, I can't say it was a surprise, because she had put the song Here on a mix for me. So I had come to know that this second album existed, but it's nothing I had ever seen anywhere. It was so low on the radar. And that must have absolutely flopped as a record. But I went with their second record, Remembrance Days. So the very specific and fiddly connection is a band with a 3-album discography, whose albums I bought their first and third on CD, but never bought their second album on CD. Now, in the case of the Sugar Cubes, that means I do not have the second album. But in the case of the Dream Academy, I have it because my future wife, had purchased it. And so that's why it is in my collection now. But it is a good record, and I might even argue it's their best record. They came out of England. Everybody, I think, remembers Life in a Northern Town, which was their debut single and really made a splash. Maybe got the marketing push, I'm not sure what. But the curse of that was it seemed like they spent the rest of their career chasing that first success. The irony being that Life in a Northern Town was sort of an ode to Nick Drake, who also put out 3 albums. And except for having an initial big hit, their careers kind of mirrored each other. They never quite made it on their own terms. I would argue that Nick Drake's second album, Brighter Later, is more on par with the Dream Academy's third album, Different Kind of Weather, where it was a more conscious attempt to try to connect with a broader audience, to try to consciously make music that felt like it would sell. But the first and third Nick Drake albums and the first and second Dream Academy albums seem very much them just kind of doing the thing that they want. And the thing that they wanted to do was make very lush, dreamy pop songs. Right up my alley. Has a lot in common with Prefab Sprout at the time. Just a very pillowy sound. Even when they rock, it's not really rocking very hard. It's just the tempo is moving a little faster. And it's just such a lush environment that they create in their songs. And it's just a trio. But another unique thing about the Dream Academy is that they have an oboe player in the band. So how many bands can you think of that have an oboe player? And especially bands that are trios, you know, there's only 3 people in the band and one of them plays the oboe. So it definitely made their sound stand out to me as unique. And on this album, so I mentioned the song Here, which is definitely a highlight for me. And it was a song that my wife, she made a mixtape for me and gave it to me after a long road trip where I came out to visit her. And I listened to it on the way back, and it definitely stuck in my head as one of the highlights. Definitely put me in that very bittersweet place when I had to drive back home. But that's far from the only worthwhile song on here. I would say, track for track, it's their strongest album. It opens great. Indian Summer is maybe the closest attempt to try to recreate Life in a Northern Town in its kind of sudden emergence into a chorus and using kind of chanting and stuff in the background. It contains a lot of the same elements, but still works really well. It's a great song. I certainly enjoy it. And The Lesson of Love is great. Hampstead Girl is a perfect pop song. They weren't what I would call an electronic band, even though I think that their sound was created through a lot of synths and studio techniques. It wasn't synthesizer forward, you know, there was more like that the pad created that the songs floated on top of. Hampstead Girl has a very sort of acoustic feel to it, and also makes me think of, oh nuts, I wish I'd come up with this name before I started filming, because I want to say the Railway Children, but that's not it. Something that starts with an L. The Lilac Time. The Lilac Time was another band that's very along these things, which as a reference may be a stupid thing to reference because you may say, I don't know who the Lilac Time were either. Fair enough. Power to Believe, Here, Everybody's Got to Learn Sometime, I believe is a cover. Is it maybe a Leonard Cohen cover? I'll cut that out if that's completely wrong. But all over, yeah, it's a really good record. And you could think of it as a little dated if you are really kind of being churlish about it, I suppose. It does feel a little of its time, but it also carries that Nick Drake spirit with it of very inward looking and not necessarily folky, but gentle. You know, it's got a gentility to it that really appeals to me. You know, it's nice music to put on, to either focus on and listen to, or just kind of have on in the background. Lots of great harmonies. Primary songwriter, who's also named Nick, I believe, Nick Laird Clowes. I have absolutely no idea how you pronounce his name. Has a real penchant for building songs into a big crescendo of a chord or a single note, especially on the oboe. And it's beautiful music to have on. It's very pretty, very easy to both pay attention to and to not pay attention to. It's a feature, not a bug. So from 1987, did I even hold it up? Doesn't have, I think it didn't help that they didn't put the band name or album title on the cover. This is much earlier. I know nowadays it's almost passé to have the album name and artist on the cover. Yeah, it was something that passed completely beneath my radar. I was not aware that it existed as an album until I heard it, a song from it, in my wife's collection, my future wife's collection. And in an act that I chose to interpret as kismet when we integrated our CD collections. They weren't huge at the time. I mean, this was only like 1991. So we hadn't been buying CDs for that long, but I probably had 200 CDs and she probably had 50 CDs. And although our music tastes really overlapped, there were maybe 3 duplicates in the entire process. And the fact that between us, we had the entire discography of the Dream Academy without producing any duplicates, I took as a sign of kismet, that we fit very well together and we're very complementary. And so, yeah, and that's what I think of when I listen to the Dream Academy, second album, Remembrance Days. I'm not even sure if I said the album name up to this point. But nonetheless, I will throw 1987 Dream Academy, Remembrance Days over to Eric. And you can look for his response on Monday on the Plastic Soundwave Cult channel. And with that, that's all I have. So I thank you for watching. Bye-bye.